it. So, like, what are some of the biggest changes you've seen in terms of from shippers and brokers regarding RFPs over the last couple of years? Been a lot of change, obviously, in the industry, but specifically with RFPs.
So, a couple things. I think first and foremost, you're seeing a lot more shippers go to bi-yearly or quarterly bids, which is kind of interesting. You know, prior to COVID, it really was um, this 1 year annual agreement, right? Handshake agreement of rates and capacity that you were allotting and lanes that they were allotting you, right? Um, and now, I mean, we're even running into some instances where with rates being so low, so now you see one end of the spectrum where you're having more frequent bids. I've also seen it go on the complete opposite, where um, shippers are smart enough to understand where the market's at. And so they've gone in and they're either not doing RFPs because they're maintaining the rates that they have in place and have had for the last, 6, 12, 18 months. Or they're locking in those prices for an extended period of time. So I talked with a larger shipper a couple of weeks ago. One of our reps has a good relationship, and they're on a 3 year cycle right now.
Wow.
So for us to be able to even get our foot in the door, we're going to have to essentially wait it out for that 3 year cycle. But their reasoning behind it, their logic is like, look, rates aren't increasing, right? They're maintaining, they've plateaued, they're still kind of at that trough, right? And so why would I go out there and run the risk of increasing the cost of freight by putting it out there in the marketplace? So and I don't necessarily blame them for that,
Hmm.
but I think those are probably we're not really seeing a ton of annual RFPs. I think, I talked to another large shipper, one that most people would know very well, and they weren't even doing an RFP this year. So
Hmm.
they're just locking in those rates, and
Hmm.
carriers aren't turning down freight, right? Tender rejections are still very low. Uh,
Yeah.
so I don't blame them for that, but it's challenging for someone who's trying to enter in with a new customer, right? I'm noticing that prior relationships don't matter as much either.
Mm.
So that's been interesting. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves on the questions, but that's
Yeah.
been
No.
interesting as well. So
Yeah. No. 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 That's a good one. So along those lines, though, what's most frustrating about what you're seeing with these changes? Is it good or bad? Getting locked in? I mean, I guess it depends on what side of the RFP you're on. If you're in, it could be beneficial, but if not, you're locked out, like you said, for maybe 2 or 3 years.
it really well it depends, right? If you're locked in and you're making healthy margins or decent margins, then obviously it works out for you, right? Which you run the risk of getting involved right now with where the market's at, and then if all of a sudden something does happen and it does change, well then how are shippers going to navigate any potential price increases? Are they going to respond the way that they did in COVID, right? That was the biggest thing. We had RFP freight or freight that had been awarded via RFPs. COVID hit the first like 3 or 4 weeks. Shippers were like, "No, we're not increasing rates." Well, then their freight wasn't moving, right?
Hmm.
So then they had no choice but to increase it exponentially. I mean, I can remember data sets of our revenue per load was just um, through the roof, and it wasn't that we were price gouging; it was that if you needed your freight moved, we have a truck in hand. Like we got to take this truck, right? Um, so I don't necessarily know if um, I, am probably of the mind that right now I'm probably glad that we don't have as many RFPs in the door today, although that's residual business.
Hmm.
But it does scare me the few that we've quoted the last couple of months, what that may look like in the future, depending on any changes in the marketplace, any disruptions. I saw a tweet last night that said that they're expecting a 2008 number wise of sales for heavy duty trucks next year. So I don't know. The thing about it is the longer that we go into this recession, I think people are responding even more frantically,
Hmm.
and there's a continuous movement of more uncertainty in
Hmm.
the marketplace that wasn't necessarily there a year ago, right?
Right.
I
Right.
guess eventually, if people call it like, "Hey, it's going to be this month or this quarter," eventually somebody's going to get it right. But right now, I don't. I think that's the biggest concern for me is nobody really knows what the future holds. Even when you look at the closing, the S&P and all of that on a daily basis, I mean, you're hitting all-time highs, and then you're backtracking. You look at cryptocurrency, we're hitting all-time highs, and all of a sudden, Bitcoin's down $7,000, right? So it's there's just so much uncertainty. I think consumer confidence is extremely low. I don't know with capacity some of the mandates with visa drivers, right? How that's
Hmm.
going to look. Are they going to put a bunch of trucks out of service? I know that that's somewhat been the case, but there's a lot of fraud out there.
Hmm.
Um, the probably the biggest question that I would ask any shipper, that's whether it be via RFP or not, is how are they handling fraud, or how are they aware of the carriers or brokers that they're utilizing, their process for vetting the actual capacity and preventing fraud.
Yeah.
So
Hmm. Hmm. I just want to go back to one thing you mentioned too. You said carrier, you read a tweet about 2008. They're saying it's going to be like 2008 in terms of
truck sales.
truck sales. What does that kind of indicate to you? Or
Well, so for one, I think truckers, asset providers,
and
and
I'm sorry. And
carriers,
what happened in 2008? So like, was
there
it
was a
a
there was a crash, right?
okay?
So people weren't necessarily buying, new orders. So when you look at truck class orders, right, there's a lag, right, of when those trucks actually hit the marketplace. Well, the problem is, I think premiums are really high for insurance. So to maintain
Hmm.
those premiums,
Hmm.
a new truck now costs you what, 150, $175,000 to get on the road. Cash is very low. A lot of asset carriers just operate that way. A lot of cash goes in, a lot of cash goes out. To be able to fix a transmitter or something like that, it may cost you 15, $20,000 to get that truck back on the road. If it's not moving, it's losing, right? You're
Hmm.
losing money. So I think carriers are more inclined today to operate older equipment. That's going to be an issue at some point, right?
Yep. Yep.
Equipment integrity. But you're not really seeing the demand for new trucks, um, because one, I think a lot of asset carriers can't afford to put new equipment on the road.
Hmm.
So it's going to be interesting to see what that, because we won't feel the effects of that probably till 2027, 2028, right? But it was a tweet by Craig from FreightWaves. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But um, like I said, that go ahead.
Yeah. No, I think I saw something. I saw something similar. So Class A truck sales are, if they're booming, then that's usually an indicator of things being kind of being positive. And the
Right,
fact that they're not means truckers will hold on to their equipment longer, which then can, if you follow it right now, you might have more service failures with, breakdowns, maintenance issues,
right.
which is going to affect your service and quality and delivery and on time, all the whole on time piece of it,
Yeah,
which will then lead to, potentially increased
all
costs
your
and things like
KPIs.
that. Yeah, yeah, right.
Right.
Okay, I'm following.
Yeah.
Gotcha, gotcha. Okay, so how it's kind of in that, because now we're getting into like data, at least I think of like data now. You start talking about KPIs and information like that. How important is data, like historical data, ELD information, capacity when you're looking at RFPs or handling them?
So from my experience, the external data is important, but nothing's more important than internal data, right? Carriers that align with your onboarding requirements, right? So I mean, you look at every brokerage out there in America, they're going to have their own carrier compliance department, or they're going to have their own carrier compliance SOP. Um, I
Mhm.
think what the problem is that there's so much information that happens or could happen when you book a truck, right? Like, are we focused on just the day of spot freight that we need to get covered? Are we really understanding where these trucks' terminals are? Are we understanding what lanes make sense for them? Where are they needing backhauls? How do we help them reposition their equipment? A lot of that data doesn't necessarily get into any TMS or any platform or any system. So I do think ELD integration is extremely important. I know you've got a couple carrier compliance tools out there like Highway, for example.
Yeah.
Um, but on the flip side, you ask truckers that that's you don't they don't want that information shared, right? They don't
Right.
want that
Right.
data being shared with everyone out there on on these platforms. And I see it both sides, right? It's kind of like Big Brother's, watching over, where your trucks are and this and that, and you got to have tracking on constantly. But at the
Hmm.
same time, I think part of that is called an overreaction or not. It goes back to this fraud piece that I'm talking about. I mean, you're seeing these. I mean, there was what $15 million in Apple products stolen back in July. Somebody's got to pay for that,
Hmm.
right? And regardless of the commodity that you move, my opinion of the matter is that's cash on the truck, right? So it could be a load of chicken, it could be compressors, it could be heavy machinery, it could be lumber, right? It could be any number of things. But in my opinion, whatever you're hauling is essentially a load of cash because at the end of the day, regardless if that load doesn't make it, albeit if it's a wreck, total claim, stolen, whatever, somebody's got to be made whole.
Hmm.
And so, when a carrier nowadays is having to you're having to provide VIN numbers, driver's license, pictures of the truck name on the side of the truck.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate that that's where we're at, right? And but the sophistication of these criminals out there, they're stealing MCs, they're hacking into the FMCSA website, like it's just crazy stuff that we're seeing, and it's unprecedented, and we've never seen it before. But I think it just shows the desperation of where we're at. I mean, I think it's just this, um, I don't know, Pandora's box of where the market's been in the last 3 to 4 years.
Yeah. I know you mentioned highway. I mean, do you think there's I look on LinkedIn, I see people say, oh, just need to know who your carrier is. You need to vet your carrier. In the same sense, I know that the criminals are getting smarter and smarter. Like, is there something that's not being talked about that can be done to kind of help this issue or resolve it?
I I don't know. I think it goes back to the relationship piece, and I know that's a cop out answer, right? Because you can always just say, well, it just depends on your relationships and this and that, but um, I think always a little bit of information being withheld in every part of the cycle, right? Like for example, and I'll just speak for a broker. If a shipment's running behind, we're trying to fix that issue behind the scenes, right? We may not relay all of the information to a customer because we don't want the customer to panic because we're the ones that are panicking. We're the ones that are freaking out. We're the ones that are trying to figure out what's going on. It's the same thing for the truck, right? If you have a really good trucking company, but you have a one driver that's gone AWOL, right? I mean, ask any broker out there if they haven't had a driver that's been fired during a shipment on a load, they haven't been in brokerage long enough, right? Like that's just part of earning your stripes, so to speak. So but on the flip side, there's just this lack of information, but I think it's a lack of transparency. It's a lot of bad actors, right? Brokers that are going on and filing reports on carriers on a one-time scenario in one situation. All of a sudden, now you've got this just convoluted dichotomy between carriers and brokers that the gap needs to be built,
Hmm.
right? The bridge needs to be built there. Because at the end of the day, we're both trying to do the right things. We're both trying to
Hmm.
service our customers well. We're also both trying to be profitable, but I think there's this alienation between carriers and brokers that has
Hmm.
just existed. I think carriers are blaming brokers for driving rates down. Brokers are blaming carriers for lack of quality of service.
Hmm.
So it
Hmm.
almost feels like there's this pit between each party that I don't know necessarily when it started. I would have to say probably when trucks were hijacking rates really high, but I don't blame them for doing that because they kind of had their pick of the litter. The prior to COVID, rates were still very low, so they had to make their money while they could. Um, but it's I don't know if there's a healthy fix for it. I think that there just needs to be more willingness from both parties, both brokers and carriers, to understand the bigger picture. in that if we don't service customers well, we don't get freight. We don't get freight, we don't make money. We don't make money, we don't exist.
Right. Right.
You know,
Right. Kind of simple. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
as simple as it sounds, but it goes back to that relationship piece that you've got to have carriers within your network who are willing to understand what you're trying to accomplish versus, and then also understand what they're trying to accomplish. Data integrity is very important. The willingness to share that data and that information.
Right.
Um, I think, I don't want to go on DAT and quote a lane that I haven't run before. I want to know a carrier in my network that's done a really good job for me that I can call and say, hey, are you in this area? What's the rate for this? What do you think you need to be at? Let me go see if I can get it for you so we both win. Right.
Yeah. Right.
A lot of times in situations where there's got to be a winner, I think people take the mindset that there needs to be a winner and a loser,
Right.
right? But
Right.
two things can be true at the same time. A
Correct.
carrier can win and a broker can win,
That's how it
right?
should
And
be.
it
Yeah.
and it's how it should be. But
Right.
it's you don't see it nearly as much in today's climate as I think maybe you probably did in the past.
Right. Yeah, and I think it comes down to like magnitude. Some people say, how much margin should a broker make? And then you start getting into,
Broker
you know,
transparency, right? Like,
right. And you don't want to go down that road, but you also want to make, people want to make enough profit so that they can stay in business, and carriers want to make enough profit so they can keep their trucks running. So there's some place in there where you'd hope people would be comfortable with that.
well, in my opinion, and I've worked for some carrier. I mean, the company I work for now, we're an asset-based carrier. We have our own assets. Like, I understand the struggles that assets go through. I get it. Like, this is the third company that I worked for that has an asset arm or what have you, a division. So I understand the difficulties of that. I think it's very, very important, where if we, like, when it goes back to my point, if we don't have freight, we don't, we're not, most smaller to medium sized carriers should be leveraging brokerages as sales teams, right? Most trucking companies are really good at truck and freight, right? They understand all of the axles, how to move the trailers around to maximize the weight, right? They understand the requirements, all how to route, right?
Hmm.
Efficiency, like they get all that. Most brokers don't understand that, right?
Hmm.
And I'm with it. I get it. I dig it. But if smaller to medium sized carriers looked at brokers and said, "Hey, that's a sales team that I don't have to pay for to find me freight,"
Right.
maybe it's a different mindset. Maybe it's a different temperature, right? For that carrier to be willing to work with brokers and be able to leverage each other's strengths, right? Because brokers don't have any assets. We have no equipment, none
Right.
anywhere, right?
Right.
But most carriers outside of your top, your top 10, top 20, right? Most carriers don't have sales teams. They don't have
Hmm.
someone that's out there hunting freight for them.
Hmm.
It's my team. They've got to go out there and they've got to find new business, right? And so you work with freight forwarders, well, they're continuously selling as well. They're trying to get more, containers. They're working on air imports or exports. They're working on cross border. That they are an additional sales rep for us. So you get in
Hmm.
good with freight forwarders, well, you have an additional opportunity, or opportunities that you may not have if you're not working with them. And so the same
Hmm.
thing could be said for carriers understanding the value that a broker brings, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. I haven't really heard it positioned like that or stated like that, but it makes total sense.
Yeah,
But it's getting the other people to, or the other party, in this case, the carriers, to kind of see it like that.
that's right. That's right.
So, yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense. So, kind of along those lines, have you ever won or lost like lanes or RFPs, even though you weren't like the cheapest? And how did how do you handle those type of situations?
Yes, I mean, I think absolutely right. Where we've won, where we've lost lanes when we were the cheapest, or we haven't, right, or vice versa. I think part of the problem with the RFP process, and maybe let me kind of set this up first. Most brokers that get on RFP lists, right? And I'm looking at this just as the first time we've never participated
Yeah.
in their RFP before. Most brokers, right, are calling, hey, I want to get on your RFP list. They'll say, hey, okay, whatever. They may exchange MC number, see that they're they've been in business for X amount of years, and they'll say, okay, you meet the requirements, we'll add you to it. Then 3 months from now, we get the RFP. We don't understand anything about the RFP. We don't understand anything about the shipper's desires, right? We don't understand what the shipper's trying to accomplish. We know nothing, right? And then we get this spreadsheet, right? And you get 10 RFPs, you're going to get 10 different types of spreadsheets. And
Yep.
you know
Yep.
this
Yep.
better than anyone, right? And what we don't understand is really what are we trying to accomplish, right? What is the shipper trying to accomplish? And then also what are we trying to accomplish, right? So you've got multitude of strategies you can take when you're quoting RFPs. You can quote the whole thing. I'm against that because that's spray and pray in my mindset. I've also taken the approach of, well, let's only quote 20% of it. That's not necessarily always the right answer either, right? Because
Right.
you're not putting enough eggs in the
Right.
basket.
Right.
So there's a healthy balance, and I don't think that everything is circumstantial. And so I've quoted lanes before, knew that we were the cheapest, followed up with the customer, the shipper after the fact, and they said, "Hey, we had a carrier that ran this lane the last 3 or 4 years. We can't give it to you because they provide quality service." Okay, well then my question is, why put the lane on the RFP to begin with,
Right.
right? If you knew that ahead of time, but then also if I'm the carrier that's running that lane, I don't know this. Well,
What are you really trying
what
to
does the
do?
relationship actually look like if a
Right.
shipper is putting a lane out there that I've been running for 3 or 4 years and
Yeah.
I've been doing it well, but they're just shopping the rate. And so
I think it could
every
be twofold, right? I mean, it's almost, I think from a shipper, looking at it from a shipper standpoint, right? Perspective of, I might not want to change the incumbent because they've been doing a good job, but I do want to
price shop,
just make, right? I just want to make sure they're in the ballpark of where rates are going or where rates
right?
are at. So I kind of get it from that perspective, but also from, right, I can see it from the other side. Don't put it out there and make me spend time because it takes a lot of time in some cases to actually complete these RFPs. So just don't, how do you do it without that though? Without doing
Yeah, I
it?
think the challenge is really it's not where you're good at, right? It's where you're not good at. And it's like, is this a market that we want to enter into? One of the approaches that we take or I've taken in the past before is looking at the total freight spend, right, of an
Yeah.
RFP, right? And then saying, hey, we want to go acquire 5 or 10% of that, or what does that look like? Okay, then if the goal is to get 10%, is that the right number? I don't know. What lane makeup is going to be of that 10%? And then where can we be profitable, but also be competitive? And that's
Hmm.
the challenge. And sometimes it's entering into those new markets. Sometimes it's taking a stab, right? And I know a lot of times, and I've just heard this dialogue before, whether it be on LinkedIn, internally, externally. Hey, we're just going to throw a number out there, and then if, in 3 months, if the price isn't right, well, then we'll just either kick the lane out or we'll ask for more money. Is that the right approach? Probably not, right? So, but I think once again, it goes back to what is the strategy and the goal. And a lot of times, some shippers are really good about this, especially the larger big box shippers. They will have they'll have a call right prior to the
Yeah.
RFP where everyone
Right.
jumps on and they kind of walk you through a PowerPoint, give you all the criteria and the details, and they'll allot some time at the end of the session. But at the end of the day, like you still don't know, is it really the lowest price? Is it the quality of service, or is it a mixture of both, or is it circumstantial based off the market, right? Do they struggle in the Northeast? Do they struggle in the Midwest? I don't know,
Hmm.
So that's proprietary information that a lot of times we don't have access to. So it just goes back to what does your internal data look like? you know, is the price right? And at the end of the day, like, how can we set ourselves up for success, not have to go back to a shipper 3 months from now and say, hey, we need more money or we got to kick this lane out because we can't continue to run this at the profitability or lack thereof
Hmm.
that we're moving it for,
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
because our overheads in tech and people, right? It's not in equipment. So we've got a little bit more room to maneuver. Um, well, once again, are we aiming for market share? Are we aiming for, new markets to be able to enter in and bring in new capacity that we haven't worked with before? Do we want to be a marketplace for carriers that we have enough freight that they're willing to want to work with us again and again?
Hmm.
Because the same could be said too, and this is really important data to look at is how many carriers does a broker set up that they run one load with and
Yeah.
then never run with them again?
Yeah. I hear it's quite a bit, right? I mean,
It's
you
it's
would know it
it's
better than me.
it's more than we want to admit to, right? But that's
Yeah.
every broker. That's every brokerage that
Right.
I've been at, and then that's that. And I have friends in the space that work for other brokerages that would say the same thing, right? Because by the time you set a carrier up, you go through the onboarding process, you run a single load with them, regardless of what you make in margin, you've ultimately lost money on that carrier, right? By the time you pay the light bill, the broker,
Mm,
the carrier compliance manager, the accountant, right, or accounting team that goes and invoices or pays it out or whatever. I mean, you've ultimately lost money on that one load when you look at it. So,
hmm.
and another thing too is when you're looking at how to price these RFPs out is like what does your profit per load need to be to break even as a brokerage? And most brokerages don't know that.
Right.
You
Right.
know,
They know
don't
they don't get down to that detail.
don't work with a carrier that doesn't know what its operating cost is per mile, right? You know, when you're negotiating with a carrier and you're trying to understand what why the price is what it is, it's like, okay, well, I know you got to make money, but like, what's your operating cost, right? What is it? What do you need to be at per mile in order to make money in, or at least worst case break even? And even a lot of carriers don't know that.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah.
So,
And so without giving out any like company secrets, when you're getting an RFP and you're just looking at a spreadsheet, what else do you provide or what else do you think about providing to a shipper to say, hey, this is why you should pick us beyond just the price we put on the page?
well, I, one thing that I got, and I learned this from one of the brokerages that I was at, and I like it. It's not a 100% success rate, but sending in power lanes, right? Which isn't the thing I've learned about brokers. None of us are creative. We just reuse the same things over and over again, um, which is funny, but that's just the nature of it, right? We all say the same things, and the reality of it is, at the end of the day, and this will answer partly answer the question. I'm very transparent when I get on a call, conference call with shippers, or I go visit, or whatever the case is. We all do the same thing. Every brokerage out there does the same thing. We use the same tools. We may use a different type of TMS, but we're all using a TMS. We all handle check calls the same. Like everything's the same. At the end of the day, it's a matter of like, who do you want to call you in the middle of the night when a trailer's
Hmm.
on fire, right?
Hmm.
Like, who do you want to hear from? There's people in your life, Kevin, that you would prefer to hear bad news from versus people that you wouldn't hear news from, right? That's just the nature of relationships, right? In humanity's sake. I would much rather hear bad news coming from my dad than I would someone that I don't have that type of relationship with. And so I think that's the first part. And the second part is power lanes, right? Hey, these are lanes that we've identified within the RFP that are really good power lanes for us that we have, quality capacity around that are in these markets on a daily or weekly basis who I know will service them well. And then providing them some actual data to support our reasoning behind what these power lanes are. Hey, this is their on time percentage. Hey, here's a prior KPI scorecard. Maybe you white out some of the customer proprietary information on it, but providing them actual data, or I even pull data within our TMS that doesn't show any type of customer information, but it shows the lanes and say, hey, when I tell you that we're in Dallas, Texas, X amount of times a day, this is actual data within our TMS that supports that basis, right? So
Hmm.
trying to provide them as much of a picture as I can without there initially almost being a relationship. So they understand that, hey, this guy or this girl, or whatever the case is, I can trust what they're saying and these quotes that they're providing me because they're actually providing tangible data that I can digest, that I can see with my own eyes and I can understand.
Hmm. Got it. Makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah, and then just my last question. So if you could change anything about the whole RFP process, to make it better for both shippers and brokers, what would it be?
I would I would standardize all RFPs and make them digital.
Standardize them and make them what?
Digital.
Digital.
Yes. I think moving away from uh, Excel spreadsheets. I wish there was like a unilateral system that we could just go in and type in our rates on the lane. It had all the information. It had, something like a merger Shipwell, right? Like it had all the annualized volume. You knew all the accessorials that came with it, like seasonality, right? Like, hey, like we may say this is 5 loads a week, but in
Mm-hmm.
October, November, December, it's going to be two or it's going to
Mm-hmm.
be 10, right? Because of peak season or whatever the case is, as much information as you could provide, right? Now I get shippers got jobs to do and they got freight that's moving, while they're trying to also work on these RFPs. And as much as RFPs are not fun for brokers or carriers, I know for a fact they're not fun for shippers, right?
Right.
Nobody likes RFPs, right? But they're a part of the supply chain. They're invaluable, right? And it allows all parties to win, or it should, right? That's the why it was created. Shippers know that they have consistent capacity. Brokers can get residual business to then offer carriers who can also create route efficiencies around their own network and what they do. So, but there's got to be more standardization, I think, within the space.
Yeah.
What that looks like, I don't necessarily know, but I would love to be able to open up 10 RFPs and they all look the same as
Yeah.
opposed to opening up 10 and they all look completely different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Even the little things like sometimes after the fact, we'll find out that we could have dropped trailer at a particular shipper or receiver, right? Well, our carrier is willing to do that, but we didn't know that when we quoted it. That's a service offering. That's a leg up, right, for
Mm-hmm.
us to be able to offer that as an additional service, as opposed to not knowing that type of information prior to, right? And sometimes
Mm-hmm.
we can even do it, and it doesn't really cost us anything, right? Because we have a carrier that has a terminal 3 miles away from the shipper that it makes more sense for them to be able to create route efficiency. So they'll go in and drop 3 to 5 trailers, yada yada yada. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Just the little things when we don't always get that type of information. Having as much of that as possible. Some shippers do this, but not all.
Right. So
So
right. So the more information, the more data you have in somewhat of a standardized format, the better off the whole process would be.
yeah, I think so. Because at the end of the day, shippers are trying to save money, brokers and carriers are trying to make money. Those two automatically they don't align, right? So, but I mean, once again, efficiency. I mean, I've seen it with projects and things that we've done in the past where we've actually lowered the rates from both the customer and the carrier side because there was more efficiency created in the process, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it allowed for drivers to be able to move much faster, not be held up loading or unloading, and then all parties win, right? So, but yeah, some type of standardized would be great.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome, Brian. This has been great. Thank you so much. Um, Definitely appreciate your candid and honest answers. Anything else you want to just share before we end it?
No, like I said, I mean, look, at the end of the day, having conversations about the things that are hard or that suck sometimes, I think is the best way to approach how we make things better. I think
Yeah.
ignoring them,
Hmm.
right? This whether it be carrier to broker relationship, broker to shipper relationship, or shipper to carrier relationship, right? Honesty and transparency, I think, are extremely important. It's more of you've earned my trust, you can lose it, as opposed to, hey, you don't have my trust, you have to earn it, right? And that's just my own philosophy. I do that in my personal life, I do that in my professional life. Like I'm gonna always expect people to do the right things until they don't,
Hmm.
not the other way around.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
looking to get you type thing. And so I think the more, and look, I mean, LinkedIn's a great source for that. You see a lot of dialogue that's happening. I support it. I don't always chime in. I'm very quiet on LinkedIn. I'm one of those people that's mentioned where I'm more of just behind the scenes on the keyboard, just looking and
Yeah.
reading and taking that information. But I think what you're doing is great. I think what sitting down and asking the questions that everyone thinks about and then putting it out there into the ether and then just talking about it, I think is extremely important. They don't RFPs at the end of the day, the intention behind them are great. It's people like you that make it easier for companies like us to succeed. Um, and so I appreciate your willingness to take on this bear, right,
Yeah.
and wrestle it
Yeah.
for us, and or wrestle it with us, right,
Yeah. Yeah.
in order for us all to win. So yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Appreciate that. I'm gonna end it now and then we can chit chat.